On today's episode of the Investment by Design podcast, we've got one of Cairns' most prominent real estate figures, a seasoned developer and someone that knows how to spot a deal from a mile away. James Fennell, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Sean.
Tell me, what got you into real estate? What was the initial spark that started the journey, I guess?
Watching too many of my clients as a bank manager having a great life. So they get passive income, they're making money, and I'm sitting in an air-conditioned office churning through their paperwork and making them wealthy, and then thought we should have a go myself.
And what was the first was the first deal a development or was it a renovation? What was the first, what dipped your toe in the water?
Not to do things by half, but going into a complete industry I had no idea on. And not do a little renovation. My first ever property deal was with a client, and we built a hotel, a pub, with 40 gaming machines, drive-thrus and the whole lot. Had no money and just winged and prayed it all the way through. And that year, and probably is about timing, that year was the year that they opened up the hotel industry to Coles and Woolies, and they became very aggressive in buying poker machines, and that was the first kicker.
When you went into that, was the plan always to sell it, or were you planning on keeping it for cash flow?
Sean, I had no idea about anything.
You didn't even have a plan.
I was just jumping into the pool.
Seemed like a good idea, so let's go for it.
I'm that generation where we didn't have floaties. Dad would pick us up and throw us in and say, start swimming hard.
And so you ended up selling that shortly after completion?
And that then allowed a roll on to other things. So you start building a pub, but then you find out next door there's a vacant land and a shopping centre goes there. And then, but you've already built a shopping centre, so let's go and do a childcare centre. And things are very organic, or osmosis, I guess you call it.
So it sounds like you did a few commercial developments before you went into sort of residential?
Yes, then got into land subdivisions, Gladstone, Rockhampton, Gympie, Bribie, Cairns, Atherton, blah, blah, blah. Probably a couple of thousand.
And have you found that's changed much over the years?
Terribly so. I was selling blocks of land. Everyone's got one of those stories at $30,000, and I felt wealthier. I felt that there was more money, we were doing more things, people were able to get in and out of property, but between green tape, red tape, compliance, time, costs, it's a professional, laborious job now. You have to hold on for a lot longer.
Can you remember like the time frames that you used to be able to get like those sort of developments
3
approved?
months.
3 months, yeah.
And so I look at some of your experience, and you can do renovations and flips and things like that in that time now, but to start from scratch with a vacant block of land, the journey is years, and that's one of the supply problems in Australia.
I was on LinkedIn the other day, and there was a town planner down on the Gold Coast, and he was saying it took him 3 years to finally get this approval across the line. Mm-hmm. And he said they went through all of these revisions, and then basically after 3 years pretty much ended up with the first original sort of like submission, which just seems crazy.
Yeah, you've heard that story about there's more lawyers in the US studying than there are lawyers practicing. There is now more town planners in Australia than there are projects. So we've got this overweighted balance. So yes, everything's tricky.
And when you look at like the supply side of like, I guess, the real estate equation, you really quickly see that developers need to like put so much fat in their profit margins if they're going to commit to a project and it take 3, 4, 5 years before they can actually sell it.
100%. People that are stepping into that industry a lot, and they'll come up to me with projects at 10 or 15%, and I have to tell them you'll go broke.
Yep.
If you don't factor in, you want to return ROI 35% minimum these days, because all the things that you can't factor in, times and other things. It's like being a farmer that you're planting seeds today and the cyclone could come, the drought could come, people could turn off that product and you may have nothing. And you've got to have that stamina, I guess, to know there's no cash flow, there's no support. It's not for the faint-hearted in property.
And is there one project of yours that stood out as one that sort of was a real win, I guess?
I had one when I went down to Gladstone and I bought this parcel of land, and I paid 4 or 5 million for it, and hadn't settled it yet. And then they announced the gas pipes coming in.
That was such a booming
And
Gladstone.
I sold it the month later for 22 million.
Wow.
So it hadn't settled. So
Yep.
I'm looking for another one of those. That was like 15 years ago, and I haven't had one since. Everything else has been really hard work.
That's almost the definition of winning the lottery, having those
It
gas
was
projects.
100%. And then you thought you could do it every day then. So
Yep.
Bill Gates said that success is a lousy teacher. So it is. So I've learned a lot more from my fails, of which I've had lots, than I ever learned from my successes.
And speaking of failures, is there one that sort of is burnt deep into your memory banks? And I guess, from that, what have you learnt, those failures?
Well, one of the things is you've got to own the failure, so I'm owning it. But the other thing I've learnt too is you can't beat time. Time will make you a success or make you a failure depending on where you are in that journey. So even taking a local example, I built small lot housing, really real good densities to make sure we could fit more people in. Didn't take. Now, 4 or 5 years later, they're worth double what I sold them for 4 or 5 years ago, because I was just a little bit in front of what people wanted and expected. So time's big. You would have seen that after COVID. You would have seen that with the builders boost, and you've had your own experience. And there is no good or bad time. It's just whatever the time is that you're dealing with.
Yeah, and once again, as a developer, that's, I guess, a real challenge is to look at that crystal ball and go, where is things heading in 4 or 5 years, especially with that lead timer from council.
Say you're doing an apartment, and apartment, from the time you start your journey, it might be 3 to 4 years before you've delivered it. So you've got to predict what is the human behaviour in 3 or 4 years. So if you were the year before COVID, you might be doing open plans and you might be doing cohabitations. After COVID, you may be wanting to do 1-bedroom units. So the whole world can shift in the delivery of that one project.
Which is, super interesting. And speaking of predicting the market, where do you think we might be heading? You've probably seen some boom and busts in your day. Do you think we've got, the current market's got legs?
Well, I have one bust that I talk to people about that no one has experienced, but you don't even believe it can be real. You've heard about the pub with no beer. When the GFC hit, which is 2007, 2008, I was building a high-rise in Gladstone, and it was going well. It was 20, 30 million, and Hutchies were doing my job for me. We went for the first drawdown, and the bank said, we have no money.
Nice.
I signed the mortgages, and the story was it was Bank West Australia who got nationalised by the Bank of England, and it ran out of money. So as a developer, you got to think, who would have predicted my bank doesn't have money? And the CBA then bought out for my bank. So, those sorts of problems. But answering your question where the predictions are, I think everybody's got to pivot and be nimble, because everybody's story is different. We had this policy, particularly in the banks, we thought we could predict things. That suburb's a good suburb, the M suburb's a bad suburb. That type of product is fantastic, that type of product is weak. It's gone. And that's even why what you're doing, your advocacy, is going to be so important, because the US is showing us this is laser focus. I can go to a street and have a great story here and a terrible story here. And if I don't have the local knowledge to actually drill down on that, I will make a mistake.
Yep.
Because there is no perfect suburb. There is no perfect mix. It's what is that specific thing that is performing, and will that return you money?
Was it Zillow that went out and, I think it was Zillow went out and bought a whole heap of properties using basically computer models. And I think they burnt something like 80 billion, 80 million? I don't know. There was some crazy number.
There's always big numbers in the US, and they just don't believe. But it is true. That commercial building on the left-hand side of the road could work, and the one on the right doesn't.
We've only got to take the block, for example. So the block auctions happened this week, and I think they sold 3 out of the 5. But that was super high-end properties. I think they were 3 or 4 times the median price in the area. They were opposite a service station, just the wrong property. Beautiful properties, but just in the wrong location. I think, that falls to that point.
I also agree, and it's a lesson for those guys, I think, that don't lose your way. And once again, with your advocacy, you could probably keep people where they stay in their lane. when the block started all those years ago, it was a very aspirational show. You as a guy could put the tool belt on and convert your little apartment building into something that could be affordable. And when we go to auction, we don't know who's going to buy it because there's 30 real people there.
Yeah.
Now it's morphed into this select thing. There's only 2 buyers every thing. It's out of reach of most people. It's not an aspirational show.
Yeah.
I think they've got to come back and say, how does a little guy can go make $150,000 on a property by just touching it? Nikki the other day was sharing a story where she put a bit of lipstick on something, put some paint on something, and make $80,000.
And I think that's where you need to know your end client. You know, if you're doing a development, who is your buyer and how big that buyer pool is. If you're building something where there's only 3 or 4 buyers for it in a market, that's a pretty risky position to be in versus building something for the masses where there's 100, 150 buyers.
You are spot on with the buyers, and I've got to tell you a story. I met him he gave me about 90 seconds. So when I was coming through, I met Harry Triguboff, and I was doing something fancy at the time, and he leaned over to me and in his very thick accent says, "Young man, you sell to the rich, you'll be poor. You sell to the poor, you'll be rich." And look at his model. I think he's the most successful property player in Australia.
I think, it's like 8,000 units or something.
And I've always remembered that too, that, as you said, you've got to pick who is your target.
And speaking of target audiences, I know you guys recently did a 1 into 2 subdivision down Edmonton, is that right? Talk us through that, shed some light on that experience and maybe some costings of what it costs these days to do one of those subdivisions.
Sure. Well, my wife is a tragic, so at 2 a.m. in the morning, instead of scrolling on a dating app, thank God, she's scrolling through real estate, so that's good. And she's found the unicorn, which we all want, the corner block, 2,000 square metres, deceased estate house on it, and where the house was pretty good. So they're hard to find. Well, we could look all year. A diamond on the beach, we call them. We find a little diamond on the beach. But once you've got them, it's still a process with the subdivisions, with headworks charges in the 30s now, the surveys, the sealing of the plants, everything else, just to split the land, sewage connections, all this. You're in that $60,000 range, so you've got to add that onto your cost base.
And what sort of time frames? If I secured a block tomorrow, 2,000 square metre block, would it take me a month, 3 months? What sort of time periods would it take to actually get that across council?
Well, I'll share you the story. We settled in August 2024, $750,000 we paid for the block. Went straight in, got the surveys done, that got sealed. The plans got sealed in February. We went in. There was some background noise happening, so we went in and fixed it all up. We've just sold it now for $790.
And that's just the front house.
That's just the front house. So we bought it for $750. Spent $80,000, sold it for $790, and I've got an approved duplex block worth $400 sitting off the back of it. So the profit's embedded, and that's the other part of this story. It is never what you earn; it is what you keep.
1,000,000%.
So what you've also got to understand when you're doing property development is how does this affect my tax? How does this affect my equity, my bank, my loans, and things like that? You have the whole picture. So once again, you normally need somebody to rely on.
And with that, so say you've sold off the front, you've on paper you've broken even really. What does the taxation actually look at in regards to what was the asset cost, I guess, of that front parcel?
Sure. Well, what they will look at is what the realised income of the project is. Because I'm keeping the $400,000 embedded profit in that land and I haven't crystallised it, that just sits there.
And do they do a valuation on that land to come up with the...
because I haven't sold it. I haven't made supply. I haven't engaged it. So it'd be like having stock in your showroom. They can't charge you a tax on something that hasn't been realised. So that $400,000 is increased equity asset, but it hasn't created a taxable event.
So it's not until you sell the whole project that then they're going to come hunting for the profits, I guess.
Yeah.
And for anyone thinking of doing those sort of 1 into 2 subdivisions, is there any sort of red flags and things they should be cautious of, I guess, going into them?
Yes. There was once a world where we just chop up blocks in all funny shapes, and councils breathing down those things. So things that we used to call rear accesses or battle axes, very unsupported by council. You'll have a harder journey getting that approved. The other thing is end users don't really like it too. People like to have a presence, a street value, a feeling that they're interconnecting with their community. Sitting up the back with 5 neighbours isn't that. So just because you can do it, you probably should look, should I do it?
Yeah.
And there can be some things to think about.
When I was selling real estate, I sold quite a few of those battle axe blocks, and you're 100% right. No one wanted them, and that's exactly it. You want that street presence. You want to be coming home, and when you're down a dingy driveway, I think it's different when you're on like acreage. If you've got a couple of 1,000 square meters, it's a very different situation to a 300 square meter block where everyone's sitting right on top of you.
And I liked your comment before about knowing who your end user is. I'd even take that forward. If you're in property development, know your exit before you get into your entry.
That's where I was having a laugh at your first story of not knowing whether you were selling it, keeping it, cash flowing it, just a log for
a
log for the ride. And, moving into the future, you don't have to open too many news articles to see, everyone talking about the housing crisis and that sort of thing. What do you think needs to happen for actual meaningful supply to come to market?
Well, my first degree, my first lecture, my first 10 minutes, the professor said, you're going to learn all this complex stuff, and we're going to give you data, and we're going to do this over the next 4 years of your degree. So you just remember, it's supply and demand. That's all it's so core simple, it can't fix until supply fixes. Yep. And the way the supply fix is now being choked in a train-like fashion that we're not running initiatives parallel. So we are not running planning at the same time as we're getting the infrastructure right, at the same time we're getting labour shortages right. So what we need, if you can imagine, if it was a freeway, we've created this big long freeway, what we should be doing is having this multi-channel lane. We can't bring it to the market faster than the people need.
Yep.
Plus, we've got policy that is broken down into old world. You've been in real estate for a long time. There is no nuclear family anymore. It could be grandma living with kids. It could be 2 brothers living together. It can be 4 tradies living together, 3 just. There's no nuclear family, but we are still wedded to this one model of delivery. And until that changes, people will force to change themselves. They'll put the granny fat in the back. They'll add value. They'll have multi-generational. But the whole change of what we keep delivering the same thing and wondering why it's not fixing the demand.
It makes a lot of sense. And I don't know if you've ever seen that analogy, but there's an analogy of basically like a traffic jam, and it's got all these cars driving around a roundabout, so a single lane, and just one person taps on the brakes, and then suddenly I think they refer to it as like a ghost traffic jam. Everyone's blocked up, so there's not actually, no one's crashed, nothing's happened, but because of the single lane, and that's, I guess, the council slowing down, and then we've got labour shortages, and suddenly, if everything was flowing, it would work, but because it's all that single lane, everything becomes bottlenecked and bottled up, and then you end up with a 3 or 4 year development, term, rather than, being able to do it in 6 months and churn out and add that supply really quickly to the market.
If you're talking locally, I have a fear that even your 3 or 4 year is optimistic now. I think we've created such a supply imbalance with such big projects like sewage stations, other things, that it can't fix.
That Mount Peter development is really interesting. So, they've got the land there ready to go, but I believe at the moment council's restricting their release of that land because they're not there for sewage and water.
100%. So even though you've got something that you can build, you can't build it because people want water. People actually want toilets.
Fancy that. With running water and toilets.
They're so demanding. The next thing they'll be wanting a roof, and it just goes on and on.
Impossible needs.
Yeah.
And tell me, do you have a project in the go at the moment? Can you shed any light on what you're up to?
Oh, yeah. I think in property, it's nice to dabble in different areas. So we've just finished a childcare centre, but the journey in NDIS is over now, in my view. But if you get into some of these beginning industries, you can do quite well. So, as I said before, we were into hotels early on with poker machines. They didn't have it before. Childcare centres became a big thing. Obviously, if you could afford it, you go into aged care. This major wealth transfer that's about to occur over the next 10 years is so enormous. There's opportunities in services and everything. So at the moment, a little bit of NDIS, but that's finished. Bit of childcare, but settling down there. I think the main game right now is housing. Boring, simple, vanilla. You can't get rid of the need that people need: a roof over their head, somewhere for their children to sleep, and somewhere to be that can be affordable. So at the moment, building lots of duplexes. I think I went into duplexes very heavy years ago, fell out of favour with them because why not just have a little block of land, make the block smaller? But now with affordability, we simply are going to have to deliver a lot more product that's under 700,000 for the end user because they can't afford it.
Completely agree. And, you know, talking that under 700,000 price bracket and talking duplexes, do you think that, like, affordability is the reason why we're not seeing more apartments getting built at the moment? Like, you look back in that, like, previous boom in Cairns, that, you know, 2004 to 2009 sort of boom, and there was apartments getting built everywhere in Cairns. Yet here we are, property prices have doubled in a very short period, but there seems to be no unit development happening at the moment.
100%. So we are building some units, so hopefully it'll make or break us. Either we'll be in front of the curve or we'll be old school, so we'll see how that goes. But I agree with your point exactly. Our problem is that the square meterage rate, to get really boring, we can't build it for the price that the end user can afford to pay for it. And so what we've got is this imbalance. And you might say, James, why is that? Because I can do it in Sydney and Melbourne, and whether it's everything from the cyclone ratings, the labour costs, the transport costs or whatever, until we get that imbalance fixed, we can't get density. And that's a real problem in Cairns because I can't take 80 buyers out of the market by building one tower. That sucks a bit of need up. So we have to keep going flat land, more infrastructure. And so I think the answer will be we have to really look into this inner city. Look, what you're doing is trying to find items of value or assets with value or redevelopment and talk about densifying in a micro way rather than in a macro way with a tower.
And that makes a lot of sense. And you talk duplexes, are they mainly single level? Is that where you're seeing the development costs really shoot up?
Yeah, I mean, you will go to another 50% development costs to go to a second story, and that's with the scaffolding and the compliance and the OHS and all these things. So, but then that sucks up more land content, and land's become the real rarity that we can't replace. So it's I think the whole thing needs to rethink, and I think some of the stuff that you've done with increasing number of bedrooms in a house or how a house is used, we have so many older people particularly living in beautiful big houses. I live up near the Botanic Gardens, and there's people living in colonial style houses they can't afford to upkeep, but there's one person in there. We've got to rethink that. That should be a family in there, but she doesn't want to leave because her friends are there and her life is there, and shouldn't have to leave, but we haven't offered her an alternative. And I'm talking about widow. We haven't offered them an alternative that makes it acceptable for us to release stock.
It's a really interesting side story here. Not that long ago, we actually looked at setting up a share house, and what we found is we could get insurance for one room. So if you're living in a property, you can get insurance your insurance will cover you to rent out one room. But if you want to rent out two rooms, we actually couldn't find an insurance provider that would cover us to rent out multiple rooms in a property that you either live in or separate. And there probably is some niche providers out there that we weren't able to find. But we went to several insurance brokers and they went, we actually don't have a policy for that sort of thing. So, talking about share houses and talking about, the older person that now has the 5-bedroom house that wants to, generate some income, there's a lot of hurdles in the way to actually do that at the moment.
Yeah, we seem to have government singing one tune and then giving out another. I'll give an example. A block of land, 10% GST paid, so $300,000-$400,000 block of land for a kid to buy means $30,000's gone off to Canberra, and then they'll give back $30,000 as an incentive. We've got some things muddled up. We've got to get government out of the way. Your idea with the share house, I've for the first time seen mature ladies, particularly, I'm not just picking on them, but some of these ladies that are in my life, hairdressers and other people, are telling me they don't have super, they've got all these rooms vacant from their children's times, and they're now cohabitating. So share houses are no longer the domain of the party boys at 20, they're now the 60-year-old woman who's trying to make ends meet. And we've got to rethink about how we offer people accommodation.
I completely agree. It's such an interesting dilemma, and like, you know, you touched on the cost the government charges there, and you look at some of these developments and the amount of like park infrastructure that they need and the actual cost to develop the land outside of just the roads and infrastructure, but actually the parks that the council's demanding and all the infrastructure that goes around that. It really makes some of these projects just so unviable, I guess.
And I think what you've done too, we've got to rethink and repurpose and reimagine probably what we've already got.
Yeah.
And I think that's some real value. And there's been a bit of a value judgment in Cairns for a while that are you better off with the existing house or are you better off trying to build one? And that was okay when we had land and options. Now we're talking Gordonvale or we're talking commutes of 45, 50 minutes, and that doesn't suit everybody. So I really believe we've got to start looking back in and reimagining. So doing what you're doing, you've got to go find those diamonds on the beach.
Yep. No,
And they're there, but they're hard to find.
So there's a lot of likely mum and dad investors listening to this. They might own their own home, might have some equity in it. You know, what's some advice that you might be able to give them?
If you're looking for the next step, first one is know that that's a part of what this journey is going to be. Go in there with knowing you have to have a certain risk appetite, and if you don't have that risk appetite, then perhaps you do need to lean on a professional and reduce your risk. So rather than being like me, jumping in the pool and just deciding I had that risk appetite, if you were a person that was more structured, you might reach out to someone like yourself and decrease your risk by getting better advice. And one of the funny things I've learned is cliches are such, everyone rolls their eyes at cliches because they've heard them so many times, but they're based on a lot of truism. And there's a lot of truism in property development. They talk about time heals all wounds, and they talk about different ones, but there's a few that struck me. You might find the ideal property and you can't afford it. It's not at the right price, and the seller won't budge and you're stuck. And one of the cliches that was once told to me is pay them what they want if you see the value, pay them what they want, but pay them when you want.
Yep.
So this is that the journey doesn't have to be, I'm going to do it now. Okay, I'm going to pay you your $600,000 for your big block of land, but I need 2 years, and structure the deal so you can de-risk it along the way. So that's another great one.
Something I so often talk about is the dollars aren't the only thing in a deal. So often it's like settlement terms. Do they need a longer settlement? Are they living in the house? What's important to them, or what's important to you? Like I say, you might not have the cash now. You might need someone to help fund it. Whatever. Can you draw out that settlement to then put yourself in a position to actually be able to capitalise on it? And it's such an interesting concept, because I think so many people go into negotiations just fixated on price, but it's only one element of, you know, a lot of big moving puzzle.
Very, very much so. I mean, if you want Trumpism about it, it's the deal. It's not just the price. The price that ends a conversation, a deal opens it up, and you've got other things to talk about. Another thing that struck me on my journey, if somebody was new and they were thinking, I can't see the opportunity, I don't know where to go. This one little thing was shown to me once, it's always struck with me. A guy held up a blank piece of paper, got a pen and drew a black circle. And he asked everybody in this auditorium I was with, what do they see? And we said, the black dot. And said, that's how you got to flip over your brain with property. None of you saw the expansive white space. All you could focus on what you see. So where do I take that? You might have a little triplex somewhere or an old crappy duplex, but maybe that's not what it should be in the future. Maybe it should be something else. I've had shops that we've converted to a childcare, or we've changed what it was. You may have a big block of land that you think, well, what else could it be? So don't just focus on what it is now, but what it could be. So your idea where you had a beautiful big house and you made it into a share house journey, that's about reimagining what it could be, not what it is. And sometimes that's where your better value is, seeing what the other people can't see. If they're only looking at a renovation, that will limit them. But if you're looking at a reimagination, there's something more to be gained.
I love that. I think that's super powerful, especially that metaphor of the black dot and focusing on what's on plain sight rather than looking, thinking outside the box, I guess. Speaking of thinking outside of the box, it wasn't that long ago in Cairns that, like, your Menorah suburbs, everyone was like, steer clear, don't buy in the M's, so on and so forth. And now you look at, like, some of those M suburbs and they're as expensive, if not more expensive, than some of the beaches suburbs. So I think, there is that element of thinking on a local level, thinking outside the box and picking where the next sort of movement's going to be. In your experience over the years, has there been any opportunities where you've managed to get ahead of the curve or spot that ripple effect and can see where that next suburb is going to boom?
Yeah, sure. There's, I think, looking at leading indicators, we like or lump it, we do follow the UK, the US, and there's bigger economies that are producing things that we later on follow. And if you look around the globe, some of the amazing areas of London or New York or whatever, they have fringe suburbs that used to be for the working class and sometimes the criminal class and all those. But what's happened is, and even if you go down to Melbourne, but what's happened is organically, as the need for those premier suburbs has increased, those rougher suburbs, if you want to call it that, have been reimagined again. The older people move out or the criminal class moves out or whatever happens, that people want to be in those suburbs. So you go around the globe and you see all these really funky, amazing places are all generating from the new energy of young people and they can't get here, but they certainly can get here. And so if you can find what I call those osmosis, this is the ripple effect in the stone in the pond. What happens is they want to be here, but they're happy to grow out. So, I mean, I come from Brisbane, so I remember when the Valley and the Brisbane was as tough as it could get. And now it's a multi-million
some great nightclubbing days.
Yeah, it's a multi-million-dollar paradise with, everybody with amazing cars and vehicles. But you only go back a few years ago. So picking the spot is really important. I think that's what I was saying about your business is that nothing beats the boots on the ground. Nothing beats the old dust tests on the stock, and nothing beats having open doors, seeing what the floods are, seeing what the good streets and the bad streets. My wife is a former police officer, and she can drive down streets and say, never buy in there, nothing's ever happened there. So they're opposite each other, but they're very different stories, but you will never know that from the data and the demographics and the Google Maps and the things like that. You need to feel and breathe it.
One of my bits of advice I often give to people that are looking at buying by themselves is go out and inspect 100 properties. Keep a diary and go see 100 properties. Don't buy the first or the second one that you fall in love with. Mm-hmm. Force yourself to go see 100 different properties. Keep a diary, record what they sell for, and try and get it done as quickly as possible. And that experience of actually going in the door, looking at the neighbouring properties, very quickly you become an expert on value. And I can guarantee after you've walked through 100 doors, you're going to get yourself a really good buy. So, talking earlier about risk thresholds, it's one way someone can massively lower their risk is by actually becoming a market expert. And I guess, if you don't have the time to go inspect those 100 properties, find someone that has, I guess.
And I think what you'll find is we see in offers that we can almost throw a blanket over the bell curve.
Yep.
And most people get it.
Yeah,
they really get what the property is. But if you can find a person that can find that little gold nugget here or here, that's very interesting. The two tails of the bell curve are interesting. The people that overpay and the people that will be able to secure a deal, and everybody else falls in the middle. So you're right.
Very much so.
But you're very patient, be able to do 100. My wife would be buying the first one. I wouldn't get past the first door.
And I think, it might be an extremism, but just go out and see a whole heap of properties. It's the only way you'll really get to know a local market. And I think, trying to buy sight unseen is fraught with danger.
I also would mention that property is still a personal journey. So when you're out there doing your 100 inspections and you're looking at roofs and how big bedrooms are and what's the neighbours like, also try to take in how are people living. Am I going in and there's beds in the lounge room, or am I going into the garage and they've reconverted that into a house? So not just the physicality of it, but what is the demand? What are they thinking, and why are they buying or living here? And I think you'll get the emotional journey as well as the physical journey.
And I might be putting you on the spot here, but if you had to go back and talk to 18-year-old James, what advice would you give him?
Don't sell.
Don't sell.
Oh, but some of the stuff I look at now, I go, my God. But
you're the edge development, 4 years on, it's all doubled.
Yeah, I think we've all had those remorse things, the things we didn't buy and the things we should never have sold. But that's the rock and roll or the the carousel of property isn't a carousel. It doesn't do this. It won't work with you. It will drive you nuts.
James, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for coming on. And if you have enjoyed this podcast, check out some of our recent episodes where we talk local real estate and what's happening in the market.